Hey team, and welcome back to the channel. Once again, my name is Brian, core design engineer with Brunswick Bowling, and you're in part 2 of the Troublemaker video series where we're detailing all the information on the dualistic core inside the Troublemaker and the Troublemaker Pearl. Now, if you haven't already, make sure you go back and check out part 1 of the dualistic core video series, the Troublemaker video series, where we're talking about the relative details of the design of the dualistic core inside the Troublemaker, and we also detail some information about the new HK22 cover base that's wrapped around the brand new Troublemaker Pearl for January. Now, of course, this is part 2, so we're going to do a deep dive into the numbers post-drilled on this core and some of the recommendations that I've got for layouts for you guys as no-thumb bowlers. Of course, as I've said before, you can use this ball as a thumb-in ball. It's going to effectively be a moderate diff, moderate RG symmetrical ball. You can use standard layouts with your thumb in, and you're going to get standard results, so to say. Nothing is different about the symmetrical core if you use your thumb, but something is very, very different about this ball if you use just fingers and no thumb. The interesting thing about no-thumb bowlers is that because they're just drilling finger holes, there's effectively only one center of mass removal. So this core uses that notion to its advantage. It has very specific features, and when you drill your fingers into them, it's going to drastically change the resulting core shape after drilling, and because of that, it's going to change the resulting post-drilled numbers, and of course, due to that, it's going to change the reaction shape. So we're going to start here looking at the weakest layouts, and we're going to go right in order from weakest to strongest. Now there is one important thing that I should mention before we dive into this. There is a guide on DV8bowling.com. It's called the Dot to Center of Grip Distance Guide, and it's going to detail all the layouts that I'm about to introduce to you, but you need that PDF as a reference guide when you make your decision about what the distances are away from the dot to the center of grip, that is the center of the bridge for no-thumb bowlers when you're making these layouts. This is only one piece of the puzzle of the layout system because, as with any standard layout system, you still need a pin to PAP distance, and we have a converter online that helps make it really easy to take these two important values, the dot to the center of grip, or CoG, and the dot to the PAP, which is common for every layout system, and it converts it for you into dual angles. Now we're going to cover all of that information about the converter and get in a little more detail about the dot to center of grip distance guide in video 3. That's all that video 3 entails. So don't get worried about having to figure all that out for yourself. I'm going to detail it all for you, but I just wanted you to be aware that that resource is available for you on DV8bowling.com. Click on the Troublemaker Pearl or the original Troublemaker. You can download that distance guide as the PDF, and of course the dual angle converter is going to be downloaded as an Excel file that you can open on multiple platforms and you can use right there in your shop with a PC or a tablet or a phone. So the critical component to this dualistic core and to any no-thumb layout, regardless of whether or not it's using this dualistic core, is the dot to center of grip distance. This is going to locate how far around the side of the core the center of grip, CoG, is from the pin, or the dot in this case. So 1.5 dot to center of grip distance simply indicates that the finger hole center, or the center of grip of the no-thumb layout, is exactly 1.5 inches from the dot in this case. So this is going to be the weakest possible layout. I'm going to detail these layouts from the weakest to the strongest, and we're going to start right here at the minimum distance that we're recommending that the pin be, or the dot be, from the fingers. So if you drill your fingers 3 inches deep, and the center of the fingers is 1.5 inches from the dot around the side of the ball, you're going to end up drilling your fingers right through the top knob of this core. Effectively, what you're doing is you're reducing the height of this core, making this core shorter overall. Because this core gets shorter, and because you're removing so much core material with the fingers because of how close the knob is to the top of the cover, that means that you're reducing this a significant amount. This core starts at a 2495 RG, but an 045 total differential. That total differential is relatively moderate, but what you can do when you drill right through the top knob is you reduce that total differential all the way down to an 035. 035 is going to offer a lot less flare potential and a lot closer flare spacing when you throw the ball. Well, that means it's going to rev later, smoother, and slower overall. This is going to be a very weak and a very long transition layout that's going to be perfect for burn conditions or for very light oil volumes in general. It's recommended for the highest of rev players in terms of your speed to rev rate matchup. So if you're one that has trouble with ball speed and you have a really high rev rate, this is a possibility as a control option for you. We don't recommend this 1.5 dot to center of grip distance layout for anyone who's a high speed player. And there are some high speed dominant players that, even though they throw it two-handed, still are relatively speed dominant. This is probably not a layout for you, but don't worry, because there are 5 possible layouts in terms of the dot to center of grip distance that we're going to be recommending, so you will still have plenty of options. If you lay out this ball with the dot 2.5 inches from the center of grip, then you're going to have a moderately stronger ball. Once again, this ball started as an 045 total differential. The RGs in all of these remain relatively stable, so I'm not really going to mention the RG values changing too much. It starts at a 2495, and within a point or two, all of these layouts maintain a relatively constant RG min after drilling. So we're going to focus on the total differential because that's going to be what is critical for the flare potential of this ball. At 2.5 inches dot from the center of grip, then you're going to get a ball that's just a little stronger than the previous layout, but still relatively a little less total differential than the original ball. This is going to be about an 043 if you drill your fingers 3 inches deep, which is our recommendation across the board for all two-handed no-thumb players. And 043 is going to be moderate flare potential, and it's going to be what I call a smooth benchmark motion. It's not going to be the strongest ball in your bag. It's going to create an even arcing motion. This is going to be an amazing benchmark option with a little bit of back end kick because it's saving its flare potential. It's not really revving in the front of the lane very much, so the ball still has good energy at the back of the lane for good back end motion despite the fact that it's not hooking a whole ton. This is going to be an amazing benchmark pin to CoG distance option for all of those slightly rev dominant bowlers, and there are a lot of them that are two-handed, so this is going to be one of the go-to layouts for sure. If you are a speed dominant no thumb bowler, then you're going to gravitate toward this one as opposed to the 1.5 dot to center of grip layout as the layout that is going to be your control layout. And you notice that this one puts the fingers in the void or the bowl of the core. As you can see, what we're doing is we're missing some of that top knob. So instead of shortening the core, we are still hitting some of that top knob. So we're driving down the differential by shortening the core just a little bit, but not nearly as much as we did in that 1.5 dot to center of grip orientation. Moving on up the ladder, we're going to show you a slightly stronger layout. This is what I would consider a strong benchmark layout, good for lots of different player styles. This is going to be an incredibly versatile layout. Now this one's really interesting because I haven't until this point mentioned intermediate differential. We've gotten a little bit of intermediate differential in the first two layouts, but relatively speaking, they're still under 5 points of intermediate differential, very squarely in the symmetrical ball intermediate differential range, even after drilling. However, you'll notice the orientation of these fingers, 3.5 inches from the dot to the center of grip, means that it starts to catch the very edge of the side of the core. So here we're half in the bowl, half in the functional void of the core, drilling out compound, but also halfway into the side of the core, where we're starting to drill out denser material, make this core relatively skinnier, and add total differential and also intermediate differential. So this ball, after drilling, is going to be an 047, so up just a little bit in total differential. But more than that, this orientation gives you 11 points of intermediate differential. So that, after drilling, is very close to what most thumb-in players are able to achieve after drilling on symmetrical balls. Now that's really significant because if this core wasn't as close to the cover stock, you wouldn't be getting that much intermediate differential after drilling. So what this means is you're going to have more flare potential and certainly more shape at the back of the lane than the previous two layouts at the 2.5 and the 1.5 dot to center of grip distance. So what you've got is a ball that flares a little more and has a slightly shorter hook window. What you're able to do with that is get into the pattern a little better, send it away, and that's going to give you a little sharper change of direction at the back of the lane and a little more mid-lane security. So this is going to be, like I said, a good strong benchmark option for most players, most styles. I don't think this is a limiting one. This is the center of the 5 layout options, and basically any player style can use this layout as a benchmark ball. Might be a weaker benchmark for speed dominant players, might be a stronger benchmark for rev dominant players. Now these last 2 layouts are where things get incredibly interesting. This ball started as a completely symmetrical ball at 0.45 total differential, but once you start drilling into the side of the core with longer pin to center of grip distances, this ball transforms itself into a strong asymmetrical ball. So right here at 4.5 dot to center of grip distance, you'll notice when you drill the fingers 3 inches like we have in all of these layouts, this ball becomes a monster. 0.54 total differential after drilling with this layout and 17 points of intermediate differential. That is squarely in the strong asymmetric category of ball motion in terms of the post-drilled numbers. And we're achieving that by drilling directly into the side of the core. You'll notice how close the side of the core is to the cover of the ball, so you hit it almost instantaneously. That means you're removing a lot of dense material very quickly with the drill bit when you drill your fingers, and that's the advantage of this core design for no-thumb bowlers. In place of removing the core mass with the thumb, we're able to remove a lot of core mass with the fingers, despite the fact that the fingers are relatively smaller and shallower. So we're getting asymmetrical ball motion out of a symmetrical ball, something that you're previously unable to achieve with any other symmetrical core design. So who's going to use this layout? Well, if you're a rev dominant bowler, this is going to be your absolute strongest layout. We're not even going to recommend that you use layout number 5 with the 5.5 inch dot to center of grip. That is just going to be over flaring and overkill for you. It's going to flare too much in the front of the lane, and it might give you adverse reaction at the back of the lane by being a little forward, or maybe just flaring so much that it's just completely out of control. No reason to have that type of layout. If you are a rev dominant bowler, this is your strongest layout for this core shape, period. If you're a speed dominant player, you're going to love this layout as a strong benchmark option. It's going to nest probably 1 ball below your strongest asymmetrical balls in the lineup as a great number 2 option, and it's going to be on the stronger side of any of the layouts that you choose. But being a speed dominant player, we also recommend that if you want to max out the ball, you go ahead and do that by using the 5.5 inch dot to center of grip location, which is what we're going to talk about right now. This is the strongest recommended dot to center of grip location. Of course, you can go all the way to 6 3/4 if you really wanted to put the fingers 90 degrees from the dot, but you're going to run into a number of complications, including flaring over the finger holes, extraneous flare potential that is going to give you literally too much ball motion in a way that is not useful or usable. But we have tested this layout, 5.5 inch dot to center of grip, on multiple players across multiple different PAPs, and although they flare a ton, with the right ball speed to rev rate matchup, there's still no problem. This is a relatively flare safe layout, and it's a quote unquote maximum layout where you're going to have a ton of mid lane traction and just an overall strong ball to dig into the pattern and open up your angles with. And just like the explanation that I gave before it, you're driving right into the side of this core, you're maximizing the amount of material you're removing from the side, you're making this core as tall as possible relative to its width by skinning it up, by drilling material out of the side of the core, and that is what gives you a relatively high differential. This one maxes out at 0.58, 0.18 intermediate differential after drilling when you drill the fingers 3 inches deep, which of course is our recommendation. I hope I've drilled that into your heads. So this of course is going to be for heavy oil, fresh volumes for matched or higher speed players, and again, we're not recommending this layout for low speed players. Of course, the dot to center of grip distance is only one component in a multiple component system to lay out no thumb layouts. You need a dot to center of grip distance that we just discussed. You also need a dot to PAP distance, and that's going to be standard. So whatever your benchmark pin to PAP distance that you normally put for most two-handed layouts is going to translate into this system just as well. We recommend using slightly longer pin to PAP distances if you're trying to get the ball down the lane with a sharper motion, and relatively aggressive pin to PAP distances, shorter in the 4 to 3 3/4 range if you're trying to maximize the flare potential of these layouts. But it's the dot to center of grip distance that's going to control the flare potential and the flare spacing the most in this core design, with the dot to PAP distance being kind of secondary. If that's a little over your head or too confusing, if you're not a pro shop operator, that's okay. You can always go through these videos with your PSO, make sure they're educated on this information, and they will make the right selection of pin to PAP distance for you. And that brings me to my final point on all of these layouts. Because this is a relatively new and relatively complicated system, we've made it as easy as possible for you. As I've said before, we're giving you the dot to center of grip distance guide that outlines all the information you just saw in this video so that you can make the right selection for the ball motion you're choosing. And we also have a converter that converts the two pieces of information, the pin to PAP and the dot to center of grip, or dot to PAP I should have said, into a simple dual angle layout that all PSOs across the world have been familiar with using for multiple decades at this point. So although this feels like daunting and new, it's actually relatively easy with the tools that we've given you. And I'm going to detail all of that in part 3 of the Troublemaker system, that is the Dualistic core overview for the Troublemaker and the Troublemaker Pearl. So make sure you tune in a couple of days where we talk about the layout converter and the tools available to select the right layout.